I called my mother from the middle of a crowded grocery store on Christmas Eve, holding a premium red velvet cake in one hand and my grandmother's famous pecan pie in the other. I asked her which one I should bring to our family dinner tonight. There was a long dead silence on the line before she finally cleared her throat and said, "Oh, we actually did Christmas yesterday." I thought it was a cruel joke until my father took the phone and told me that my presence would only embarrass them in front of my sisters, new wealthy white-in-laws. They uninvited me from my own family holiday while secretly squatting in a luxury Aspen mansion that my company built and owned. I did not cry. Instead, I gave the cake to a homeless little girl outside the store and asked if she wanted to change her life today. Then I pulled up my property management application and initiated a full security lockdown, freezing my toxic family out in the snow. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Simone. I am 32 years old, and by all standard metrics, I have built a life that most people only dream about. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a luxury real estate development firm and investment fund. I specialize in building high-end vacation properties for the ultra-wealthy. I drive a beautiful car, I wear tailored suits, and my bank accounts are secured. Yet despite all the glass ceilings I have shattered in the corporate world, the hardest wall to break through was always the one inside my own childhood home. Growing up as a Black woman in a family obsessed with image and social climbing meant that my worth was constantly being measured, graded, and ultimately found lacking. My parents, Cynthia and Harold, were the type of people who cared more about how things looked to the neighbors than how things actually felt behind closed doors. They worshipped at the altar of high society, and their ultimate prize was my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was 28 years old and the undeniable golden child. She was the one who played the game perfectly. While I was wearing construction boots and negotiating zoning permits on dusty building sites, Chloe was attending charity galas and climbing the social ladder. My parents viewed my career in real estate development as a glorified construction job. They called it unstable and unladylike. They wanted a daughter who married into generational wealth, not one who built wealth with her own bare hands. Their ultimate dream came true when Chloe brought home Preston. Preston was 32 years old, white, and hailed from a family in Boston that constantly bragged about their old money status. To my parents, Preston was the ultimate trophy. He was the golden ticket that would finally elevate our family into the elite circles my mother had been trying to infiltrate for decades. They fawned over him. They changed their voices when they spoke to him, adopting that stiff, artificial tone just to sound more refined. They pushed me further into the shadows because my independence and my blunt nature terrified them. They thought my presence would somehow scare off the people they were so desperate to impress. But I still tried. I spent my entire adult life trying to earn a seat at their table, trying to prove that my success was valid and that I was worthy of their love. That desperate need for their approval is exactly why I found myself standing in the middle of a crowded grocery store on Christmas Eve, frantically trying to make everything perfect. The store was an absolute madhouse. Shoppers were pushing their carts aggressively through the narrow aisles, grabbing the last organic turkeys and imported cheeses. Holiday music was blaring from the overhead speakers, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own anxious heartbeat. I was standing in the bakery section, analyzing the dessert display as if my life depended on it. In my left hand, I held a beautiful, artisanal red velvet cake. Red velvet was my mother's absolute favorite. She used to say that a proper holiday dinner was incomplete without it. In my right hand, I held a freshly baked pecan pie made with a recipe that tasted exactly like the one my late grandmother used to bake when I was a little girl. My grandmother was the only person in the family who had ever truly understood me. Bringing her signature pie always felt like bringing a piece of her warmth into the room. I stood there weighing the two options, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I wanted to impress them tonight. I wanted to show up to the family Christmas dinner and finally be treated as an equal. I navigated my cart past the artisanal cheeses and organic produce, feeling a strange mix of pride and apprehension. I had spent thousands of dollars on gifts for them this year. I bought my father a vintage watch he had been eyeing for months. I bought my mother a designer handbag that she had subtly hinted at during our last awkward lunch together. For Chloe and Preston, I secured a highly coveted reservation at a fine dining restaurant in Manhattan, paying for the entire evening in advance. I did all of this because I foolishly believed that generosity could bridge the massive emotional gap between us. I believed that if I could just present myself perfectly, if I could just show them that my hard work had yielded tangible, sophisticated results, they would finally accept me. I had even practiced my conversation points in the mirror that morning. I planned to ask Preston about his family's historical ties to Boston, hoping to show my mother that I could be just as cultured and refined as her precious son-in-law. The sheer amount of emotional labor I expended just to exist in my own family was staggering, but it was a burden I had carried for so long that I hardly noticed its weight anymore. The grocery store was filled with families shopping together, laughing and debating which brand of eggnog to buy. I watched a mother and daughter jokingly fight over the last tin of cinnamon rolls, and a sharp pang of envy hit my chest. That easy, casual affection was something I had never experienced with Cynthia. Our interactions were always transactional, always conditional, based on how well I was performing my assigned role in her grand social play. I pushed those thoughts away, focusing back on the cakes, the red velvet or the pecan. The choice felt heavier than it should have. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before she finally answered. The background noise on her end sounded muffled, like she had stepped into a closet or a quiet hallway to take my call. "Hello, Simone," she said. Her voice sounded strained, tight, and unnaturally formal. I immediately noticed that she was using her special telephone voice. It was the elevated, overly enunciated tone she exclusively used when trying to impress wealthy white people. She was code-switching hard, and the realization made me pause for a second. "Hey, Mom," I said, keeping my voice bright and cheerful. "I am at the store right now, finishing up the last-minute shopping for tonight. I am standing in front of the bakery, and I cannot decide. Should I bring your favorite red velvet cake, or should I grab the pecan pie that tastes like Grandma's secret recipe? Or you know what, I can just bring both if you think Preston and his parents would like to try them. I am so excited to see everyone tonight. What time do you want me to head over?" There was a pause. It was not a normal conversational pause. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. I could hear the faint sound of holiday jazz music playing in the grocery store around me, but the line in my ear was completely dead. "Mom," I asked. "Are you there? Did you hear me?" I heard her take a sharp breath. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped, losing the artificial refinement and replacing it with a cold, nervous edge. "Simone," she started, then stopped. She cleared her throat again. "Oh, well, the thing is, we actually did Christmas yesterday." I froze. The red velvet cake in my hand suddenly felt like a brick. I blinked, staring blindly at the organic bread display in front of me, trying to process the English words she had just spoken. "Yesterday," I repeated. My brain simply refused to compute the information. "What do you mean you did Christmas yesterday? Today is Christmas Eve. The dinner is tonight. We have been planning this for a month." "Well, plans changed," Cynthia said, her tone shifting from nervous to defensive. Preston's parents had a very tight schedule. They are accustomed to a certain standard of holiday celebration, and we had to accommodate their timeline. We had a lovely dinner last night, just the immediate families. We did the gift exchange and everything. It was very intimate. My chest physically ached. I could feel the air being squeezed out of my lungs. The immediate families. That is what she had said. The immediate families, and I had not been included. "I am your daughter," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my desperate attempt to keep it steady. "I am your immediate family, Mom. How could you have the family Christmas dinner without telling me? How could you just leave me out?" "Listen, Simone," Cynthia hissed, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper. "Do not start making a scene over the phone. You are always so dramatic. You know how important this weekend is for Chloe. Preston's family is extremely traditional. They are old-money Boston elites. They expect a certain level of decorum and refinement." I felt a hot tear escape my eye and roll down my cheek. And I lack decorum. Is that what you are saying? I am too embarrassing to be around your new white in-laws. Before my mother could formulate another lie, there was a scuffling sound on the line. I heard muffled arguing, and then the deep booming voice of my father Harold took over the receiver. "Simone, stop badgering your mother," he demanded. His voice was laced with that familiar, arrogant authority he always used when shutting me down. "Dad," I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "You had Christmas dinner without me. You lied to me about the schedule and just left me out. I have a trunk full of gifts for you. I was just buying your dessert. Let us speak honestly since you insist on pushing the issue," Harold said coldly. "Everything was simply easier without you here. Your sister is trying to secure her future with a very prominent family. The Prestons are cultured people. They do not understand your loud personality or your abrasive independence." I stood completely motionless in the middle of the grocery store aisle. Shoppers bumped past my cart, muttering apologies, but I could not feel my limbs. My own father was dissecting my character piece by piece, treating me like a liability rather than a human being. "We needed this weekend to be flawless," Harold continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "And frankly, Simone, we did not want to risk you bringing up your unstable career. It is truly an absolute embarrassment for all of us." "Goodbye, Simone." The line went completely dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear for a long time, sounding like a flat line on a heart monitor. I slowly lowered the phone from my face. The store continued its frantic holiday pace around me. People were rushing past with their overflowing carts, entirely consumed by their own festive preparations. A woman accidentally bumped my shoulder and offered a quick apology before hurrying away toward the checkout registers. I barely felt the impact. I just stood there gripping the plastic container of the red velvet cake so tightly that the rigid plastic edges dug sharply into my palms. My father's words echoed in my mind, playing on a continuous cruel loop, an absolute embarrassment for all of us. Those words were not new. They were just the latest addition to a lifelong soundtrack of rejection that had played constantly in the background of my existence. For as long as I could remember, I was the designated scapegoat of our family. Chloe was the radiant sun, and the rest of us were just supposed to orbit blindly around her, catering to her every whim. When Chloe got a low grade in middle school, my mother marched into the principal's office and blamed the teachers for not recognizing her unique learning style. When I brought home a nearly perfect report card, my father scrutinized it and asked why I had not managed to get that one final point to achieve absolute perfection. Every single achievement I earned was meticulously minimized or entirely dismissed. When I first started my real estate development company, they laughed and called it a cute little project that would eventually fail. When I closed my first $1 million deal, they warned me not to get arrogant because money could not buy class. Yet when Chloe managed to date Preston, a man whose family owned a few failing country clubs, my parents treated her like she had just won a Nobel Prize. They acted as if her proximity to old money whiteness was the ultimate achievement our family could ever hope to attain. I looked down at the cake in my hands. The bright red crumb contrasted with the pristine white cream cheese frosting. It was supposed to be a peace offering. It was supposed to be the magical key that finally unlocked their conditional love. But the lock was changed, and they had not even bothered to give me the new address. They were hiding out in some luxury vacation rental, pretending to be old money aristocrats while actively erasing their own daughter from their narrative. My chest heaved as I took a deep, trembling breath. For a fraction of a second, I felt the familiar sting of tears pricking the corners of my eyes. The little girl inside me who just wanted her parents to be proud, wanted to collapse right there in the baking aisle and weep uncontrollably. But then something fundamental shifted inside my soul. The hot sting of rejection cooled into a sharp, icy resolve. It was as if a heavy, suffocating fog had suddenly lifted from my brain, clearing my vision for the first time in 32 years. I was a self-made millionaire. I employed dozens of hardworking people. I built magnificent luxury resorts from the ground up, managing complex architectural projects that required immense intellect and grit. I did not need to beg for a seat at a table that I could easily buy and sell 10 times over. I was not an embarrassment. They were. They were so blinded by their desperate, pathetic thirst for social status that they were willing to throw away their own flesh and blood just for a seat next to a man who likely looked down on them anyway. I placed my phone back into my designer purse with deliberate slowness. I looked at the grocery cart full of expensive imported cheeses, vintage wines, and prime cuts of meat. I had intended to pay for their entire lavish holiday feast out of my own pocket. Instead, I simply abandoned the cart right there in the middle of the crowded aisle. I kept only the red velvet cake and the pecan pie. I walked to the express checkout lane and paid for the two desserts in absolute silence. The young cashier wished me a Merry Christmas, but her cheerful voice sounded like it was coming from underwater, far away, and disconnected from my reality. I offered a polite, tight nod and walked out through the automatic sliding doors, bracing myself for the weather. The brutal blast of cold air hit me the moment I stepped outside the supermarket. The evening sky had darkened significantly, and a heavy snow was beginning to fall rapidly, blanketing the sprawling parking lot in a thick layer of pristine white. The biting wind whipped my dark hair across my face, stinging my cheeks. I pulled my tailored wool coat tighter around my body and began the long trek across the expansive lot to where I had parked my vehicle. The freezing cold actually felt incredibly good. It perfectly matched the new temperature of my heart. As I walked, I began calculating my next move with absolute precision. I needed to figure out exactly where they were staying. If Preston and his pretentious family were involved, it had to be somewhere extravagant and exclusive. My parents certainly did not have the funds to rent a high-end luxury cabin during the peak holiday season. They were up to their eyeballs in consumer debt, just trying to maintain their fake suburban lifestyle. That meant they were either using Preston's money or they had found some other manipulative way to secure a premium location. I needed to investigate this thoroughly, but first I needed to get into my warm car and out of the storm. As I approached the far isolated corner of the parking lot, my attention was suddenly drawn to a battered silver sedan parked haphazardly under a flickering yellow streetlight. The car looked entirely out of place among the sleek SUVs and luxury vehicles typical of this high-end grocery store. What caught my eye was not the extensive rust on the rear bumper or the jaggedly cracked taillight. It was the fact that the windows were completely fogged over from the inside, clearly indicating that someone was sitting in there with the engine turned off. The back seat was piled high to the ceiling with black garbage bags, stuffed animals, and random household items. The snow was quickly accumulating on the front windshield, and the vehicle looked like it had been parked there in the freezing cold for several hours. I paused, my hand hovering over my own car keys. A normal person busy with their own holiday schedule might have just minded their own business and driven away into the night. But the profound rejection I had just experienced had left my emotional senses incredibly heightened. I recognized the subtle, quiet signs of pure desperation because I had spent my entire youth trying to hide my own emotional desperation. I walked slowly and deliberately toward the silver sedan. As I got closer, peering through the icy glass, I could make out two figures huddled together in the front seats, a woman and a small child. They were wrapped tightly in several thin, mismatched blankets, holding on to each other desperately for basic warmth. The woman had her arms wrapped fiercely around the little girl, attempting to use her own body to shield the child from the freezing temperature creeping through the thin, poorly insulated glass of the car windows. I tapped gently on the driver's side window, being careful not to startle them too much. The woman flinched violently anyway, her wide eyes darting toward me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She had the exhausted, haunted expression of someone who had been fighting a losing battle against the world for a very long time. Her cheeks were hollow, and her dark, beautiful skin looked ashen and pale in the sickly glow of the overhead streetlight. She slowly cracked the window open just a tiny fraction of an inch, keeping her posture highly defensive and ready to flee at a moment's notice. "Please do not call the police," she said, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. Her teeth were actually chattering audibly from the bitter cold. "We are just resting here for a minute. The car engine overheated earlier today, and I do not have enough money for gas to keep it running to use the heater. We will move along very soon, I promise you." I looked past her to the little girl sitting in the passenger seat. She looked to be about 8 years old. She was wearing a thin, bright pink spring jacket that was entirely useless against a brutal winter snowstorm. Her huge, expressive brown eyes stared at me from beneath a frayed, knitted beanie. She looked incredibly hungry, painfully cold, and completely terrified of what might happen next. In that exact moment, the stark, sickening contrast between this devoted mother and my own mother hit me with the overwhelming force of a runaway freight train. Here was a woman sitting in a freezing, broken-down car, giving every ounce of her own body heat to protect her child from the elements. Meanwhile, my own mother was sitting comfortably in a luxury vacation home sipping expensive vintage wine and telling her wealthy white guests that her daughter was a worthless embarrassment who was not welcome at the dinner table. The fundamental unfairness of the universe was absolutely staggering. "I am not going to call the police," I said, keeping my voice as soft and non-threatening as possible. "My name is Simone. What is your name?" The woman hesitated, her rigid defensive posture softening just a tiny fraction as she processed my calm demeanor. "I am Tasha," she finally said. "And this is my daughter Zuri." "It is absolutely freezing out here, Tasha," I said gently. "Why are you parked out here in the middle of a winter storm?" Tasha swallowed hard, looking down at her bare hands tightly gripping the freezing steering wheel. "We got evicted this morning," she whispered, a single tear escaping her eye. "The landlord said we missed 2 rent payments and he changed the apartment locks while I was dropping Zuri at school. We literally have nowhere else to go tonight. All the local shelters are completely full because of the holiday rush. I just wanted to get her something warm to eat, but my debit card declined inside the store." I looked back at the little girl. Zuri was staring intently at the clear plastic containers in my hands. Her eyes were fixed entirely on the red velvet cake and the pecan pie. I suddenly realized how absurd I must look standing outside in a blizzard wearing a custom-tailored designer coat and holding 2 gourmet desserts, while a displaced family froze to death inside their car. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had just casually spent on gifts for people who openly despised my existence. I thought about the expensive private restaurant reservation I had booked for a sister who actively wanted me to fail in life. I possessed so much financial resources, so much societal power, and I had been foolishly wasting all of it trying to water a completely dead garden. I looked back at Tasha and made a firm decision that would instantly alter the entire trajectory of all our lives. I did not want to just hand them a $20 bill and walk away feeling morally superior. I wanted to do something profoundly meaningful. I wanted to redirect all the energy, love, and massive resources I had been wasting on my toxic family towards someone who actually needed and truly deserved it. I carefully shifted the heavy pies to my left arm and reached into my designer purse, pulling out my leather wallet. But before I handed her any cash, I held up the 2 large dessert containers for the child to see. "Zuri," I said, speaking directly to the quiet little girl, "do you happen to like red velvet cake or do you prefer pecan pie?" Zuri looked up at her mother, silently asking for permission to answer the strange lady in the snow. Tasha gave the tiny, encouraging nod, her own eyes quickly filling with fresh tears. "I really like red velvet, Zuri," whispered her voice, incredibly small and incredibly sweet. I smiled warmly and handed the large, heavy container through the cracked window. Tasha had to manually roll the window down much further to accept the bulky package. The rich, sugary smell of the sweet cream cheese frosting immediately filled the small enclosed space of the freezing car, bringing a hint of warmth. Then I handed the heavy pecan pie through the open window as well. "You can absolutely have both of them," I said kindly. "I was actually supposed to take these to a large family dinner tonight, but my family decided they did not want my company anymore. It seems to me like you two could use a special holiday treat much more than they ever could." Tasha took the heavy cakes, her cold hands trembling violently against the plastic. "Thank you so much," she choked out, burying her face against the boxes. "You have absolutely no idea what this means to us." She has not eaten a single thing since breakfast this morning. "I am not finished yet," I said firmly. I stepped back slightly from the window and looked at the battered old car, then looked Tasha squarely in the eyes. "I am a successful real estate developer. I own multiple luxury properties across this entire state and beyond. I currently have warm beds, hot food, and massive resources that are simply sitting empty tonight. I have spent my whole adult life trying desperately to prove my worth to people who stubbornly refuse to see me. Tonight, I am completely done doing that. Tonight, I am finally putting my energy exactly where it truly matters. I leaned much closer to the window, the heavy snow continuing to fall steadily around my shoulders. Tasha, I asked, my voice carrying the absolute unwavering certainty of a strong woman who had just reclaimed her entire identity. Do you want to change your life tonight? Tasha stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open in pure disbelief. The profound shock on her face was deeply moving. She looked down at her shivering daughter, who was tightly holding the red velvet cake, and then she looked slowly back up at me. I could see a painful lifetime of severe hardship written in her exhausted eyes. But right then, I also saw a brilliant flickering spark of desperate, hopeful light. Yes, she whispered, the hot tears finally spilling over her dark eyelashes and freezing instantly on her cold cheeks. Please help us. Yes. Good, I said decisively. Leave this broken car right here in the lot. Grab whatever essential bags you need for tonight and get into my vehicle right now. It is the large black SUV parked right behind you. The heater is already running on high. We are going straight to a nice luxury hotel. I am personally paying for your room for the next entire month. We will get you both hot food, brand new winter clothes, and tomorrow morning we are going to sit down and talk about getting you a permanent, well-paying job at my development company. Tasha's loud, heavy sobs broke completely through the quiet stillness of the snowy parking lot. She reached across the center console and hugged her young daughter so tightly. Zuri was finally smiling, holding the cake box like it was the most precious, valuable object in the entire world. I turned around and walked confidently toward my vehicle, unlocking the heavy doors with my remote key fob. The biting winter wind continued to howl aggressively, but I no longer felt the freezing cold. The icy hard resolve in my chest had successfully solidified into a burning, unstoppable purpose. My parents had foolishly tried to break my spirit today. They arrogant thought that by excluding me from their lavish fake Christmas celebration, they would send me spiraling downward into a deep, dark depression. They fully expected me to beg for their attention. They fully expected me to cry miserably and ask for their forgiveness for the ridiculous crime of simply being my authentic self. They had absolutely no idea who they were actually dealing with. They had no earthly idea the massive level of power and influence I actually wielded in this city. As I stood there and watched Tasha and Zuri hurry across the slippery, snowy asphalt and climb safely into the warm, heated leather seats of my premium vehicle, I felt a profoundly deep sense of utter peace wash over my soul. I got into the driver's seat and turned up the heat even higher, watching the two of them slowly thaw out in the reflection of my rearview mirror. I had just gained a beautiful new purpose in life, and my toxic family had just permanently lost their favorite punching bag. The emotional transition was entirely complete. I calmly put the car in drive and pulled smoothly out of the grocery store parking lot, leaving the heavy ghost of my desperate, painful childhood completely behind in the falling snow. The drive to the hotel was quiet, save for the soft sound of the luxury SUV heater warming the cabin and the gentle hum of the tires against the snowy roads. I watched Tasha and Zuri through the rearview mirror as they slowly began to relax their rigid postures, melting away as the freezing cold finally left their bones. Zuri had already opened the box holding the red velvet cake and was carefully eating a piece with a plastic fork I kept in the glove compartment. Seeing the pure joy on that little girl's face as she tasted the sweet cream cheese frosting filled an empty space inside me that I had not even realized was hollow. My parents had spent my entire life making me feel like my very existence was a burden to be tolerated. But here in the quiet sanctuary of my car, I felt completely powerful and undeniably valuable. We pulled up to the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel downtown. It was one of the most expensive and secure establishments in the city, with glowing holiday lights and massive evergreen wreaths framing the revolving glass doors. I handed my keys to the valet and quickly guided Tasha and Zuri inside into the sprawling warm lobby that smelled like pine and expensive vanilla. The concierge greeted me by name, immediately recognizing me as a frequent corporate client who booked suites for high-profile investors. I did not hesitate. I asked for their best available executive suite and placed my black titanium credit card on the polished marble counter. I instructed the concierge to book the room for an entire month, prepaying the whole balance without a second thought. I also opened an unlimited tab for room service and hotel amenities, explicitly stating that Tasha and Zuri were my personal VIP guests and were to be given anything they requested. Tasha stood behind me, clutching her meager plastic bags of belongings, weeping silently into her scarf as she heard me making the arrangements. When the concierge handed over the heavy brass room keys, I turned to Tasha and placed them directly into her trembling hands. "You two are safe now," I said, my voice steady and reassuring. "Go upstairs, take a hot bath, and order whatever you want from the room service menu. Order the steak. Order the roasted chicken. Order the most expensive hot chocolate they have for Zuri. Nobody is going to bother you here, and nobody is going to kick you out. We will talk tomorrow about your new job, but tonight you just rest." Tasha threw her arms around my neck, sobbing profound prayers of gratitude against my shoulder. I hugged her back, feeling a strange, profound sense of poetic justice. My mother had quite literally left me out in the cold tonight, discarding her own flesh and blood to protect a fragile social lie. Meanwhile, I was using the very wealth she mocked to rescue total strangers from the brutal winter storm. The stark difference between my chosen kindness and my family's calculated cruelty settled deeply into my spirit, confirming that I had absolutely made the right choice to walk away from them forever. I waited until Tasha and Zuri were safely escorted onto the elevator by the bellhop, before I finally turned around and walked back out into the freezing night. The valet brought my vehicle around and I climbed into the driver's seat, taking a deep breath of the quiet air. The snow was coming down even harder now, completely blanketing the city streets in incredibly thick white powder. I sat there with the engine idling, feeling the residual adrenaline slowly drain from my system. The profound quiet of the car felt almost heavy after the chaotic emotional whiplash of the last 2 hours. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in 32 years, I was completely, utterly alone. My fingers acted almost on their own accord, operating out of pure masochistic habit. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to unlock it. I opened the Instagram application, fully knowing exactly what I was going to find, but needing to see it anyway. I needed to witness the lie they were spinning. I needed to look directly at the event that was apparently too refined and important for my presence. Chloe was always the most active on social media, constantly curating an artificial image of wealth and perfection for her thousands of followers. Her page was already flooded with recent holiday updates. The first picture that loaded on my feed was a heavily filtered group shot. There was my mother looking perfectly manicured, wearing an expensive-looking cashmere sweater that I knew she had purchased on credit. There was my father holding a glass of dark liquor, smiling that fake, arrogant smile he reserved for business associates. And right in the center was Chloe, clinging tightly to Preston's arm. Preston was wearing a smug grin, looking every bit the entitled old money heir he claimed to be. They were all raising crystal glasses toward the camera, looking obscenely happy and completely unbothered by my absence. The caption below the photo read, "Bringing in the holiday with the best people. Nothing beats an intimate family Christmas, with my amazing fiancé and future in-laws, feeling so incredibly blessed." I swiped to the next photo in the carousel. This one featured Chloe posing alone in front of a massive roaring stone fireplace. She was holding a delicate glass of champagne and staring thoughtfully into the flames. The caption on this one was even more nauseating. "Spending our first Christmas engaged at this gorgeous winter estate. Preston's family truly knows how to celebrate the holidays in absolute luxury. So thankful to marry into such a successful and generous family." I stared at the screen, feeling a dark, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. She was heavily implying that Preston and his supposedly wealthy parents had provided this lavish setting for their holiday gathering. They were playing the parts of the refined aristocrats, sipping expensive champagne and exchanging gifts in a beautiful private winter wonderland, while making sure to block me from ruining their aesthetic. But as I stared longer at the photo of Chloe posing in front of that massive roaring fireplace, the dark, bitter laugh suddenly died in my throat. My eyes narrowed, and I brought the phone closer to my face, squinting at the details in the background of the image. My pulse began to accelerate, shifting from dull anxiety to a sharp, sudden spike of pure, unadulterated shock. I looked at the specific cut of the heavy stones making up the enormous fireplace. I looked at the unique architectural slope of the vaulted cedar ceiling stretching high above her head. I swiped back to the first group photo, analyzing the sweeping panoramic windows behind my parents, catching the distinct reflection of the surrounding pine trees and the custom-designed iron light fixtures hanging from the heavy wooden beams above the dining table. My breath caught sharply in my chest. I recognized that stonework. I recognized those light fixtures. I recognized the exact grain of the cedar wood on that vaulted ceiling, because I was the one who had personally approved every single one of those expensive design elements just 3 months ago. They were not at some random luxury rental provided by Preston's wealthy family. They were standing right in the middle of the Alpine Crown. The Alpine Crown was the crown jewel of my real estate portfolio's latest development project. It was a massive $4 million luxury resort property located in the exclusive mountains of Aspen, Colorado. My company had literally just finished the final interior staging last week. The property was strictly off-limits, sitting completely empty, and waiting for a multi-million-dollar private viewing scheduled for a foreign investor right after the new year. Nobody was supposed to be inside that house. It was locked down, winterized, and secured. My brain scrambled to put the impossible pieces together. How in the world did they get all the way to Aspen, and how on earth did they get inside my highly secure commercial property? And then the sickening realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The emergency override code. 2 years ago, when I first started traveling heavily for site inspections, I had given my mother a master digital override code for my property management system. I gave it to her because she had cried about worrying for my safety and wanting a way to reach me or locate me in case of a dire medical emergency. She swore she would never use it unless someone was dying. I had been so desperate to prove I was a good, dutiful daughter that I had foolishly handed her the digital keys to my entire kingdom. My mother had actually used my emergency safety code to break into my multi-million-dollar commercial property. She had packed up my father, my sister, her arrogant fiancé, and his entirely fake wealthy parents and flown them all to Aspen to illegally squat inside my luxury estate. They were actively using my massive success, my hard-earned wealth, and my property to impress Preston's family, all while telling those same people that I was an unstable, embarrassing failure who was not fit to sit at their dinner table. The sheer magnitude of their audacity was paralyzing. They were drinking my expensive wine, resting by my custom-built fireplaces, and sleeping in the premium beds my company had purchased. They were parading around my $4 million estate, pretending it belonged to them or to Preston's family, while actively uninviting me, the actual owner, from the premises. They literally pushed me out into the cold so they could play house inside the empire I built. My hands began to tremble violently, but it was not from the winter chill creeping through the car windows. It was from a blinding white-hot rage that was currently incinerating every last drop of familial loyalty I had ever held on to. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was so desperate for their affection that I would just sit quietly in my apartment, crying over a grocery store cake while they stole my property to elevate their social status. They thought they could just erase me from the family portrait while simultaneously stealing the expensive frame I had bought and paid for. My mother really believed she had outsmarted me, pulling off the ultimate social climbing heist right under my nose. She thought she was safe because I always backed down, I always apologized, I always kept the peace. But she had severely miscalculated. The daughter who used to cry over their rejection died in the grocery store aisle an hour ago. The woman sitting in this car was a corporate shark who ruthlessly defended her assets against anyone who tried to cross her. I was no longer the sad, lonely girl seeking validation from a toxic mother. I was the sole proprietor of a massive real estate firm, and I was currently dealing with a group of illegal trespassers. I stared at Chloe's smug face on the digital screen, my thumb hovering over the image. The holiday music from a nearby store faintly drifted across the snowy parking lot, completely at odds with the warfare currently brewing in my mind. They wanted to play games with my property to impress a group of arrogant white socialites. They wanted to treat my life like their own personal stage production. It was finally time for the director to step in and forcefully shut down the entire play. I grabbed my tablet from the passenger seat, opening the master management application, ready to strike them where it hurts. Their luxury vacation was officially over, and the eviction was about to begin immediately. I did not call them back to scream. The old Simone would have dialed my mother's number immediately, screaming and crying and demanding to know how she could do something so incredibly cruel to her own flesh and blood. The old Simone would have begged for an explanation, pouring all her pain into the phone receiver, while my mother simply manipulated her and called her crazy and dramatic. But I was completely done playing that pathetic game. Screaming would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they had successfully hurt me. It would allow my mother to play the victim in front of Preston's family, clutching her invisible pearls and apologizing for her unstable, aggressive daughter who was trying to ruin their peaceful Christmas dinner. I absolutely refused to give her that narrative. I sat in the quiet warmth of my luxury vehicle, watching the heavy snow continue to fall outside the windshield, and I opened my company tablet. The bright glow of the screen illuminated the dark cabin, reflecting in my eyes as I brought up the proprietary property management application that my firm used to control our global real estate assets. My heart rate was remarkably steady. My hands were no longer shaking. The interface required a two-factor biometric authentication protocol before granting master access. I pressed my thumb against the scanner and watched as the system instantly verified my identity as the sole legal owner and chief executive officer. The screen transitioned from a locked landing page to a highly detailed interactive floor plan of the Alpine Crown. Every single room, every hallway, every smart device, and every integrated security system in that massive $4 million estate was completely at my fingertips. It was a terrifying level of digital control, and it belonged entirely to me. I navigate through the administration panel, looking at the live status updates of the property. The system showed that every single zone in the house was currently active and drawing massive amounts of power. The master suite was occupied. The guest suites were occupied. The grand dining room was fully lit. The property was buzzing with the activity of people who felt utterly entitled to the fruits of my labor. I stared at the little glowing green dots on the screen that represented active smart devices across the property. They were sitting in my custom-designed living room, probably laughing at my expense, completely unaware that the actual owner was sitting in a snowy parking lot thousands of miles away, holding their entire manufactured reality in the palm of her hand. The sheer profound irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. My mother had always tried to control my life, dictating what I should wear, how I should speak, and what career I should pursue. But right now, in this exact moment, I was the one holding the master key to her entire social existence. I tapped the screen and opened the central climate control dashboard. The Alpine Crown was designed to be the ultimate winter sanctuary. It featured a state-of-the-art, radiant heating system running beneath the reclaimed oak floors, and a massive central forced air system that kept the cavernous rooms perfectly comfortable, even in the dead of a Colorado blizzard. According to the application dashboard, my mother had set the internal temperature to a balmy 74 degrees. They were likely walking around in light cashmere sweaters, completely insulated from the freezing mountain air outside, acting as if they owned the very air they were breathing. I dragged my finger down the digital slider on the screen, watching the target temperature drop. I did not just turn it down a few degrees. I dragged that slider all the way down to 50 degrees, which was the absolute minimum temperature required to keep the pipes from bursting in the winter. I confirmed the command and smiled as the green heating icons across the entire floor plan instantly turned gray, indicating that the massive industrial furnaces in the basement had just quietly shut themselves off. It would take a little time for a house of that immense size to lose its ambient heat. But within an hour, the freezing Colorado night would begin to creep through the thick glass windows and seep into the walls. The luxurious warmth they were currently enjoying would slowly transform into a biting, uncomfortable chill that no amount of fake old money arrogance could fix. But I was not finished. I navigated to the fireplace control module. The Alpine Crown featured 5 custom-built gas fireplaces, including the massive 2-story stone hearth in the grand living room where Chloe had just been posing for her social media pictures. I selected all 5 units and remotely severed the gas line connections, engaging the hard digital locks. The roaring flames that had provided such a beautiful backdrop for their fake aristocratic holiday would instantly snuff out, leaving nothing but cold, dark stone. Next, I opened the security module for the basement level. The Alpine Crown housed a custom-built climate-controlled wine cellar that I had personally stocked with over $50,000 worth of rare vintage wines and premium champagnes meant exclusively for my high-net-worth clients and investors. I checked the access log and felt a fresh wave of disgust wash over me. The log showed that the cellar door had already been opened 4 times today. They were actively drinking my premium inventory, serving it to Preston's arrogant parents, to prove how cultured and wealthy our family supposedly was. They were literally toasting to their fake success using my incredibly expensive assets. I tapped the security override command and engaged the biometric deadbolts on the heavy glass cellar doors. The system confirmed the lockdown with a small notification. The cellar was now functionally a vault. Unless they were planning to take a sledgehammer to commercial-grade reinforced glass, there would be no more vintage Bordeaux or expensive champagne flowing at their holiday dinner. They were entirely cut off from the luxury they had stolen. I then moved to the integrated audio-visual system. The application showed that they were currently streaming a curated playlist of holiday jazz music through the invisible ceiling speakers in the main living areas. I highlighted the entire audio network and executed a hard shutdown. The smooth, festive music that was undoubtedly setting the perfect mood for their elegant Christmas Eve would abruptly cut to complete dead silence. I could almost picture the confusion on their faces as the fireplaces simultaneously died and the music abruptly stopped, leaving them sitting in an increasingly cold, quiet house, staring at each other in the sudden heavy silence. As I continued to review the property logs, looking for any other systems I could remotely disable, my eyes caught something unusual on the financial dashboard. The management application was linked directly to my corporate accounts to track maintenance and vendor expenses for the property. I noticed 2 massive pending charges that had been initiated within the last 48 hours. I clicked on the billing details and my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. The first charge was for a local elite private chef service based in Aspen. My mother had apparently hired a high-end culinary team to come to the house and prepare a customized 5-course Christmas Eve dinner for her guests. The second charge was for a daily luxury housekeeping service scheduled to come in every morning to make the beds, clean the bathrooms, and ensure the house remained in pristine condition throughout their stay. Both of these exorbitant expenses had been billed directly to my real estate firm's corporate account. She had not only broken into my property, but she had the unmitigated audacity to use my business accounts to fund her private catering and maid services. She was essentially stealing my money to pay people to clean up the messes she was making in the house she stole from me. The absolute shamelessness of her actions was staggering. I quickly looked up the contact information for the private chef service listed on the invoice. I checked the time on my car's dashboard clock. It was early evening, which meant the chef was likely already at the house prepping the kitchen for their lavish holiday meal, slicing the Wagyu beef and preparing the truffle appetizers. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the catering company headquarters. The line rang twice before a polite receptionist answered. I identified myself as Simone, the chief executive officer of the real estate firm that owned the Alpine Crown and the authorized account holder for the billing profile they had on file. I maintained an incredibly calm, professional, and authoritative tone. I informed the receptionist that the woman who had booked the chef service, Cynthia, was an unauthorized individual who had fraudulently accessed my corporate account. I clearly stated that all services were to be canceled immediately, effective right this very second, and that I was formally disputing the charges with my corporate bank due to fraudulent activity. The receptionist sounded incredibly alarmed and apologetic. She informed me that their lead chef was currently on site at the property preparing the first course for a party of 6. I instructed her to call her chef immediately and tell him to pack up all of his ingredients, all of his equipment, and leave the premises without serving a single plate of food. I warned her that if her staff remained on my property or provided any further services to the unauthorized individuals occupying the house, I would involve law enforcement and pursue legal action against their catering company for aiding in the misappropriation of my corporate funds and trespassing on private commercial property. She assured me that the chef would be pulled from the house within the next 10 minutes. I then made a second phone call to the luxury housekeeping service doing the exact same thing. I canceled the daily cleaning contract, reported the fraudulent use of my billing information, and officially flagged my mother's name across their entire vendor network as an unauthorized user who was banned from booking services at any of my properties. I sat back in my seat and placed the phone gently on the center console, letting out a long, slow breath. The trap was now fully activated. I had systematically dismantled every single aspect of their perfect, luxurious holiday without ever having to raise my voice or shed a single tear. I had taken away their warmth, their light, their music, their stolen wine, their private chef, and their cleaning staff. They were about to find themselves sitting in a freezing, dark, quiet house with absolutely no food and no access to the premium amenities they had been bragging about to Preston's family. My mother had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, insignificant, and powerless. She had tried to convince me that my career was an embarrassment and that my independence was a character flaw. She thought she could just brush me aside and use my achievements to prop up her golden child while simultaneously hiding my existence from the very people she was trying to impress. But tonight she was going to learn a very hard, very cold lesson about exactly who possessed the real power in this family. I was the one who built the castle, and I was the one who could tear it down around them with the simple swipe of a finger. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest of my car, staring out into the dark, snowy night, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The eviction process had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the fallout that was undoubtedly heading their way. I pictured Preston and his snobbish parents looking around in absolute confusion as the private chef abruptly packed away the gourmet dinner and walked out the front door, leaving them hungry and bewildered. I imagined my father's face as he tried to figure out why the expensive wine cellar refused to open for him. I thought about Chloe shivering in her designer evening wear as the house slowly dropped to a punishing 50 degrees. They had wanted a memorable Christmas, and I was ensuring that they would get exactly that. A Christmas they would absolutely never forget, as long as they lived. The silence in my car was comforting, now a sharp contrast to the absolute chaos I had just unleashed upon the Alpine Crown. I simply closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable phone calls to begin. I tapped the primary contact icon on my screen, dialing the direct line for Apex Executive Security, the elite armed response firm I had retained to safeguard all my commercial properties in Pitkin County. The phone connected on the second ring with the crisp, professional greeting of the operations director. "This is Simone, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Crown Developments," I said, my voice steady, measured, and stripped of all hesitation. "I am reporting an active commercial trespass at the Alpine Crown Estate on Red Mountain Road. A group of unauthorized individuals has breached the property using a compromised emergency master code. They have unlawfully occupied the premises, tampered with internal systems, and attempted to charge private services to our corporate vendor accounts." The director pulled up my account instantly, his tone shifting into rapid operational readiness. "We have your master profile on screen, Ms. Simone. We see the environmental overrides you just initiated from the admin portal. How would you like us to proceed?" "I want a tactical response unit dispatched immediately," I instructed. "I want the property cleared and secured within 15 minutes. Every individual currently inside that house is to be removed from the premises without exception. I have incoming high-priority private guests who will be arriving to take occupancy of the estate, and I will not have unauthorized squatters compromising the integrity or security of my asset. If anyone refuses to comply, coordinate with the local sheriff department and have them formally arrested for felony breaking and entering. Under Visual Protocol MS. Simone, the director, replied. Our patrol units are already staging near the lower gate. We will have boots on the ground in under 4 minutes. Full body camera feeds will be archived to your corporate dashboard. I ended the call. Set my phone on the dashboard and leaned back against the leather seat, watching the snow fall quietly outside my windshield in the city below. Hundreds of miles away in the high-altitude chill of Aspen, the consequences of a lifetime of entitlement were about to descend upon the Alpine crown. Inside the grand living room of the estate, the atmosphere had deteriorated into sharp, biting discomfort. The sudden death of the 2-story stone fireplace had left the cavernous room exposed to the rapid drop in temperature. The radiant floor heating was dead, the forced air vents were blowing bitter mountain air into the room, and the soft jazz that had provided a smooth, sophisticated soundtrack to the evening had cut out completely, leaving an oppressive, heavy silence behind. Preston stood near the window, his arms crossed over a tailored designer sweater that was entirely inadequate for a room plummeting toward 50 degrees. His breath was beginning to form faint vapor in the cold air. His mother, Victoria, sat on the imported leather sofa with her mink coat pulled tightly around her shoulders, her lips pressed into a thin line of undisguised disdain. His father, Arthur, tapped his fingers impatiently against his glass of lukewarm tap water, his expression sour and judgmental. I thought you said this place was fully staffed and turnkey. Preston snapped, glaring across the room at Chloe. The heat is off, the music is dead, and the chef just packed up his knives and walked out the door claiming the billing was declined. What kind of operation are you people running up here? Chloe looked frantic, her expensive holiday makeup beginning to crease under the stress. She was rubbing her bare arms, shivering in her backless silk dress. It must be a technical glitch with the mountain power grid, she stammered, casting a desperate, pleading look toward our mother. Mom, do something. Call the property concierge back. Tell them who we are. Cynthia was pacing the hardwood floor, clutching her phone to her ear, her face pale beneath her makeup. I have tried calling the estate manager 3 times, she whispered, her voice trembling with rising panic. The system says our access profile has been suspended. Harold, go down to the basement and check the electrical breakers. Do something before Arthur and Victoria freeze to death. I am not an electrician, Cynthia, Harold muttered defensively, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets as he shivered near the dark hearth. And the basement stairs are locked. The keycard reader is flashing red. This is ridiculous, Victoria said, her aristocratic New England accent cutting through the room like a razor. We were promised a 5-star private mountain retreat. Instead, we are sitting in an unheated barn with no dinner, no wine, and no staff. Arthur, call our driver. I refuse to spend our Christmas Eve shivering in someone else's poorly managed timeshare. No, please, Victoria. Just give us 10 minutes. Cynthia pleaded, rushing over to the sofa with her hands clasped together, completely abandoning her manufactured poise. The owners are personal associates of ours, very prominent people in commercial development. This is just a minor administrative error with the local utility company. We will have the heat restored and a private car bring in dinner from the village immediately. Before Cynthia could finish her lie, the sharp, synchronized crunch of heavy combat boots echoed from the front stone courtyard. Heavy commercial floodlights suddenly washed over the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the entire living room in blinding white light. What in God's name is that? Arthur demanded, standing up abruptly. The heavy oak front doors did not open with a polite knock. The electronic master deadbolt disengaged with a sharp mechanical thud, and 4 armed private security officers, in tactical winter uniforms, stepped into the grand foyer. They moved with practiced efficiency, 2 fanning out across the perimeter, while the lead supervisor stepped forward into the center of the living room, a rugged digital tablet in his gloved hand. Good evening, the supervisor announced, his voice carrying the cold authority of absolute legal jurisdiction. I am Supervisor Vance with Apex Executive Security. This property is private commercial real estate owned by Apex Crown Developments. We have an active trespass dispatch for this location. Everyone in this room needs to produce government-issued identification immediately. Cynthia gasped, clutching her throat while Chloe let out a high-pitched shriek. "How dare you barge in here like this?" Harold bellowed, puffing out his chest and stepping between the officers and Preston's parents, trying desperately to salvage his shredded authority. "Do you have any idea who I am? We have full authorization to be in this house. We are personal guests of the ownership." The supervisor did not even blink. His expression remained completely neutral as he looked down at his tablet. "The sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Crown Developments, Ms. Simone, has personally issued an immediate eviction order for this address. Our records show unauthorized entry using an overridden emergency master protocol. You have no lease, no guest registration, and no legal standing on these premises." At the mention of my name, the entire room seemed to lose its gravitational pull. Cynthia froze, the blood draining completely from her face until she looked like a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Chloe took a step back, her hands flying to her mouth. "Simone," she whispered, her voice cracking in utter disbelief. "What does Simone have to do with this house?" "She is the owner," the supervisor stated flatly, his eyes scanning the group. "And she has instructed us to clear this facility immediately. You have precisely 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the property. If you fail to comply, sheriff deputies are staged at the lower gate to take all parties into custody for felony criminal trespass." Preston's father turned on Harold with eyes full of fury and disgust. Simone Arthur sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "The daughter you spent the entire car ride up here mocking. The one you said was an unstable failure who could not hold a real job. You told us this estate was provided by your family investment fund. You lied to us. You dragged my family into an illegal squatting scheme." Preston looked at Chloe as if he were seeing her for the first time, his expression hardening into pure revulsion. "You told me your family owned half of this mountain, Chloe. You said your parents had exclusive rights to this entire development. You are nothing but frauds." "Preston, please, it is not like that," Chloe cried, reaching out to touch his arm with trembling hands. "Simone is my sister. This is just a family misunderstanding. She is doing this to spite me. She is jealous because I am marrying you." "I do not care about your petty sister drama," Preston snarled violently, pulling his arm away from her touch. "My father and I are leaving. Do not ever call me again." Preston and his parents did not even bother to pack their bags neatly. They grabbed their heavy coats, dragged their rolling luggage across the hardwood floor, and marched straight out into the blizzard, slamming the front door behind them and leaving Chloe sobbing hysterically on the floor. Cynthia stood in the center of the frozen room, watching her carefully crafted social fantasy shatter into a million jagged pieces. She turned toward the security supervisor, her eyes wide and manic with panic. "You cannot do this to us. It is Christmas Eve. We have nowhere to go. All the hotels in town are booked. We will freeze out there." "That is entirely between you and the local authorities." "Mom," the supervisor replied without an ounce of sympathy. "Your 10 minutes are now down to 7. Start moving toward the exit or our team will physically assist you off the property." Harold tried one last desperate attempt at defiance. "I am her father," he yelled, his voice cracking with humiliation. "I demand you call her right now. She cannot throw her own parents out into a snowstorm. It is illegal." The supervisor simply gestured to the two armed officers flanking the doorway. "Escort them to the outer gate," he ordered. The humiliation was total, absolute, and merciless. My parents and my sister were forced to scramble through the dark, unheated rooms, frantically stuffing their clothes into their bags, while armed guards stood over them, counting down the minutes. They were marched down the stone steps of the Alpine Crown, their cheap luggage dragging through the deep snow, the heavy front doors slamming shut and locking securely behind them. They stood at the edge of the private mountain road in the freezing dark, the wind howling around them, shivering in the very snow they had tried to leave me in. Their borrowed luxury was gone. Their wealthy white in-laws had abandoned them with disgust, and they were left standing in the cold, finally facing the reality of what their arrogance had cost them. The digital clock on my luxury SUV's dashboard glowed with a soft blue light, indicating that exactly 28 minutes had passed since I gave the final eviction order to the security team. I was driving slowly down the slick, snow-covered streets of downtown Denver, miles away from the chaos unfolding in Aspen. The heated leather seats radiated a comforting warmth against my back, easing the residual tension from my shoulders. The thick tires of my vehicle gripped the icy asphalt with complete confidence, a perfect metaphor for how I was currently navigating my life. For the first time in my 32 years, I was not sitting by the phone waiting anxiously for my mother's approval or dreading her inevitable criticism. I was the one holding all the cards. I knew the exact psychological profile of my mother, and I knew that it would take her roughly 30 minutes to process the absolute magnitude of her public humiliation before her shock finally morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. She would need time to drag her heavy luggage through the knee-deep snow. She would need time to watch Preston's taillights disappear down the mountain road, effectively taking Chloe's golden ticket to high society with him. And most importantly, she would need time to realize that she had no backup plan. Her entire fragile social ecosystem had just imploded in the most spectacular way possible. I turned the steering wheel, navigating toward a high-end boutique hotel where I planned to spend the night. I could have driven home, but I wanted to treat myself to room service and a spa bath. I wanted to celebrate my newfound freedom in absolute comfort. Just as I pulled into the hotel parking garage, the digital display on my dashboard lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. The timing was so incredibly precise it almost made me laugh out loud. 30 minutes exactly. I let it ring 3 times, listening to the steady chime through the premium sound system of my car. I wanted her to wait. I wanted her to feel that agonizing second of panic, wondering if I was simply going to ignore her completely. On the 4th ring, I reached out and tapped the answer icon on the touchscreen, keeping my breathing perfectly steady and my facial expression completely blank. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice as smooth and undisturbed as the surface of a frozen lake. I did not ask how her Christmas Eve was going. I did not ask if she liked the red velvet cake. I simply offered a calm professional greeting, like a CEO addressing a highly problematic employee. The response was immediate and deafening. A shrill, hysterical scream erupted from the car speakers so loud that I actually had to reach over and dial down the volume. "You malicious, jealous, vindictive little girl!" Cynthia shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing with the hollow sound of someone standing in a freezing parking lot. "What is wrong with you? How could you do this to your own family? How could you humiliate us like this?" I leaned back in my seat, putting the car in park and turning off the engine. I let her scream. I let her expel all that toxic energy into the empty space of my quiet vehicle. "You ruined everything!" My mother sobbed hysterically, the sound of the bitter mountain wind howling in the background of the call. Preston left. His parents left. "Do you have any earthly idea what you just did? You embarrassed me in front of important white folks, Simone." Arthur and Victoria looked at us like we were absolute trash. They called us frauds. They looked at me like I was some ghetto scam artist who broke into a house. How am I supposed to show my face in polite society ever again? How is your sister supposed to recover from this? Preston will not even answer Chloe's phone calls. You destroyed her future because you are so bitter and jealous that no decent man wants to marry you. The sheer absurdity of her logic was fascinating to witness. Even now, standing shivering in a snowstorm after being caught trespassing and attempting to steal my corporate resources. Her primary concern was not her relationship with her daughter. Her primary concern was how she looked to a pair of racist, arrogant country club snobs who never actually respected her in the first place. She had spent her entire adult life trying to assimilate into a world that actively rejected her, erasing her own cultural identity and pushing away her own successful black daughter just to secure a proximity to whiteness for Chloe. And now that her delicate house of cards had collapsed, she was desperately trying to make it my fault. "I hear you yelling, Mother," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, "but you seem to be leaving out the part where you used a stolen access code to break into a $4 million commercial property that belongs to my company. You also conveniently forgot to mention the part where you tried to charge a private chef and a luxury maid service to my corporate credit card. That is called felony fraud and breaking and entering. You are incredibly lucky. I just sent private security to throw you out instead of sending the local police to put you in handcuffs. How dare you speak to me about laws and property? My mother screamed, her voice going hoarse from the freezing cold. I gave you life. I raised you. Whatever belongs to you belongs to this family. We are your parents. You owe us. We just needed a nice place to host the Prestons for the holiday. You have so much money, Simone. It would not have hurt you to just let us use that empty house for one weekend. You could have just stayed quiet and let your sister have her special moment. But no, you always have to be the center of attention. You always have to ruin things for Chloe. Dad is having a panic attack right now trying to find us a place to sleep, and it is entirely your fault. I listened to her frantic, desperate breathing over the phone line. I could hear the crunch of snow under their boots and the faint sound of Chloe sobbing miserably in the background. The old version of me, the daughter who desperately craved her mother's affection, would have caved right there. She would have felt immense guilt for leaving her family out in a blizzard. She would have called the security company back, apologized profusely, and begged her parents to forgive her for overreacting. But that weak, insecure woman no longer existed. She had been permanently erased in the grocery store aisle when my father told me I was an embarrassment. I waited for a long, quiet moment, letting the silence stretch across the phone line, until my mother's frantic breathing began to hitch with uncertainty. Then I delivered the final surgical strike. I am not ruining anything, Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that cut straight through the digital connection. I am simply honoring Dad's exact wishes. Earlier today, when I was standing in a crowded grocery store holding your favorite cake, Dad explicitly told me that everything was easier without me there. He said my career was an embarrassment and my presence would only ruin your perfect image. So I listened to him. I decided to make absolutely sure that you were not burdened by me in any way. And since my career is such an embarrassment to you, I figured you would not want to be burdened by my dirty, unstable real estate property either. I just removed the embarrassment from your holiday. You should be thanking me. Cynthia gasped, a sharp, hitched sound of pure realization. She finally understood that I had heard every single cruel word they said, and that their own arrogant cruelty was the exact weapon I had just used to destroy them. Simon, please, my mother stammered, her tone suddenly dropping the aggression and attempting a pathetic pivot toward manipulation. Baby, it is freezing out here. The snow is getting so deep, we cannot find a single open hotel in Aspen. Everywhere is booked for Christmas. Please just call the guards and tell them to let us back inside. Just for tonight. We will leave first thing in the morning, I promise. I smiled, a slow, cold smile in the dark cabin of my car. I am afraid my business is just too unstable to accommodate unexpected guests, I replied, mirroring the exact condescending tone she had used on me for 32 years. Maybe Preston's wealthy parents can rent you a room. Oh wait, they left you standing in the snow. Merry Christmas, Mother. I reached out and pressed the red button, ending the call instantly. I did not just hang up. I went into my phone settings and permanently blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's number. Then I blocked Chloe. I severed the digital connection completely, ensuring that their toxic chaos could never reach my ears again. While I sat in my warm car feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire life, the reality of my actions was settling heavily over the majestic snowy peaks of Aspen. My mother, my father, and my golden child sister were currently experiencing the severe, brutal consequences of their own narcissistic entitlement. Because Aspen was a premier holiday destination for the ultra-wealthy, every single luxury resort, boutique hotel, and private lodge within a 50-mile radius had been completely booked solid for over 6 months. There was absolutely no room at the inn for a family of disgraced frauds who had just been evicted by armed guards. With no other viable options, and the temperature dropping dangerously below freezing, my father was forced to call a cheap local taxi service. They had to drag their wet, freezing designer luggage through the muddy slush of a gas station parking lot miles down the mountain. The only accommodation they could manage to secure on such incredibly short notice. On Christmas Eve was a dingy, run-down roadside motel located right next to a noisy interstate highway. The motel had flickering neon signs, stained carpet, and a heating unit that rattled loudly every time it turned on. It was the absolute antithesis of the old money luxury they had been desperately trying to project. Cynthia spent the entire night sitting on a lumpy motel bed, wrapped in her damp, expensive coat, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper and realizing that her social climbing dreams were permanently dead. Chloe cried hysterically until she threw up, mourning the loss of a wealthy fiancé who had discarded her the second he realized she was not a real heiress. Harold paced the small, smelly room, furiously trying to figure out how to explain this catastrophic humiliation to his peers back home. They were trapped in a cheap, filthy box, completely isolated and entirely defeated by their own arrogance. Meanwhile, I walked through the polished brass doors of the boutique hotel in Denver, carrying my overnight bag with a light, graceful step. The concierge greeted me warmly, handing me the key to a beautiful penthouse suite with sweeping views of the snow-covered city. I went upstairs, ordered an extravagant room service dinner of perfectly cooked steak and truffle potatoes, and ran a deep, hot bubble bath. I sat in the steaming water sipping a glass of complimentary champagne and listening to the soft, quiet jazz playing from the bathroom speakers. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel any regret. I only felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. For decades, I had allowed my family to dim my light to make me feel small and inadequate, just so they could feel better about their own pathetic insecurities. They had constantly demanded my resources while actively denying me basic human respect. But tonight, the heavy chains of generational trauma and familial obligation had been completely shattered. I stepped out of the bath, wrapped myself in a plush white robe, and climbed into a massive, comfortable bed that felt like a warm cloud. I pulled the heavy duvet over my shoulders, closing my eyes as the soft snow continued to fall gently against the window pane outside. There were no more phone calls to dread. There were no more impossible expectations to meet. There was only the quiet, beautiful certainty of my own hard-earned success, and the knowledge that I was finally entirely free. I drifted off into a deep, uninterrupted slumber, sleeping more peacefully than I had ever slept in my entire life, knowing that tomorrow morning would bring the dawn of a completely new world. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my penthouse suite, casting a warm golden glow across the thick white duvet. I woke up slowly, stretching my limbs and enjoying the profound quiet of my surroundings. There was no screaming, no demanding voices, no heavy expectations hanging over my head. Just the soft hum of the hotel heating system and the distant muted sounds of the city waking up below. I ordered a pot of fresh coffee and a plate of fresh fruit from room service, taking my time to enjoy the simple luxury of a peaceful Christmas morning. My mind drifted briefly to Tasha and Zuri, safely tucked away in their own warm suite, probably ordering their own massive breakfast right now. That thought brought a genuine smile to my face. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows holding my warm coffee mug and watched the snowplows clearing the Denver streets. Eventually, I walked back to the plush bed and picked up my phone. I had permanently blocked my parents and my sister last night, but toxic people always find a way to leak through the cracks. When I unlocked my screen, I saw that my notification center was completely overloaded. Since they could not reach my primary phone number, they had resorted to emailing my personal and corporate accounts and messaging me from the phone numbers of various extended relatives. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the first email. The subject line was written in all capital letters, demanding immediate attention. It was from my mother. She had typed out a massive, rambling message filled with the most textbook gaslighting I had ever seen in my entire life. She did not apologize for breaking into my property. She did not apologize for stealing my corporate funds. Instead, she immediately launched into a vicious, manipulative attack designed to make me feel like the ultimate villain. She wrote that I was destroying the family legacy. She typed paragraph after paragraph about how Black women are supposed to protect each other in this harsh world. She tried to weaponize our race and our shared struggles to guilt-trip me into submission. She claimed that by exposing their lies, I was tearing down another successful Black family and giving white people exactly what they wanted to see. She wrote that Chloe had finally found a good, wealthy man who could elevate our family name and that my actions had completely ruined her marriage before it even began. She accused me of being so deeply bitter and jealous of my sister's happiness that I intentionally waited for Christmas Eve to throw them out into a deadly blizzard. She said my success meant nothing if I was cold and lonely at the end of the day. I read the email with a completely blank expression. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost comical. She was using the very real concept of black solidarity as a weapon to shield herself from the consequences of her own criminal actions. She expected me to sacrifice my assets, my peace of mind, and my basic human dignity just to protect her fragile social climbing ego. My father had also sent an email through his old business account. His message was less hysterical but equally toxic. He tried to play the role of the disappointed patriarch. He wrote that he had raised me to be better than this. He claimed that family property was shared property, and that my refusal to share my wealth was a sign of deep moral failure. He completely ignored the fact that he had called me an embarrassment just 24 hours ago. Now he was demanding that I pay for their hotel stay and immediately wire them funds to cover the cost of a flight back home. I did not reply. I did not type out an angry response defending my boundaries. I simply forwarded both emails to my legal team to add to the growing file of evidence. I knew exactly how this toxic dance worked. If I responded, they would feed off my emotional energy, using my words to further twist the narrative. Silence was the only response that truly removed their power. But my family was not done. When they realized I was not going to engage privately, they decided to take the battle to the public arena. I opened my social media applications and immediately saw the massive digital firestorm my sister had ignited overnight. Chloe had taken to both TikTok and Facebook to launch a highly coordinated public smear campaign against me. She had posted a series of videos recorded from the bathroom of their cheap, rundown motel. The lighting was harsh and flickering, perfectly highlighting her tear-stained face and messy hair. She was wearing an oversized hoodie, shivering dramatically for the camera. She delivered a masterclass in narcissistic victimhood. She stared directly into the lens and cried hysterically, telling her thousands of followers that her own sister had just thrown her and her elderly parents out into a freezing blizzard on Christmas Eve. She spun a completely fabricated narrative portraying me as a bitter, jealous older sister who hated seeing her younger sibling find true love. She conveniently left out the fact that she was illegally trespassing in a $4 million commercial property. She left out the stolen access codes and the fraudulent credit card charges. Instead, she told her audience that I had invited them to my vacation home only to call armed security guards to drag them out into the snow simply because I was petty and spiteful. She sobbed about how her wealthy fiancé had left her because the trauma of the night was too much for him to handle. She painted me as a lonely, angry single woman who used her money to abuse her family because she could not find a man of her own. The videos had gone completely viral. Chloe knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to garner sympathy from the internet. She used trending hashtags about toxic families and surviving abuse. The comment sections were an absolute nightmare of misdirected outrage. Thousands of strangers were leaving vicious comments attacking my character, my appearance, and my business. They called me a monster. They said I deserved to die alone. They tagged my real estate development company, leaving fake one-star reviews and demanding that people boycott my business. The social backlash did not just stop at strangers on the internet. My extended family had seen the videos and decided to jump on the bandwagon. My phone was flooded with angry text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had never bothered to check on me a single day in their lives. Aunt Valerie sent a long text calling me a disgrace to the family name. Uncle Marcus left a furious voicemail saying I needed to get down on my knees and beg my parents for forgiveness. Cousins who always asked me for loans were suddenly calling me a cold-hearted corporate shell of a human being. They all blindly believed Chloe's performance without ever bothering to ask for my side of the story. It was a coordinated attack designed to isolate me and shame me into submission. They wanted to break my spirit, using the weight of public opinion. They wanted me to panic and release a public apology begging them to take me back so the internet hate would stop. They wanted me to hand over my money and my properties to quiet the storm they had created. I sat on my plush hotel bed watching the view count on Chloe's video tick higher and higher. My chest felt heavy with the profound betrayal of my extended family. They were so quick to believe the worst about me. They were so eager to tear down the successful black woman who had outgrown their toxic crab-in-a-barrel mentality. But as I watched Chloe's fake tears streaming down her face, the heavy sadness in my chest evaporated completely, replaced by a sharp clinical focus. I closed the social media applications and took a long sip of my hot coffee. I refused to play my assigned role in their tragic digital soap opera. I was not going to make a crying response video. I was not going to argue with strangers in comment sections. I was a chief executive officer, and I was going to handle this like a corporate war. I opened my contacts and dialed the direct line of my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless, incredibly brilliant man named Richard, who specialized in high-stakes litigation and crisis management. Richard answered immediately despite it being Christmas morning. I calmly and methodically explained the entire situation to him. I detailed the unauthorized entry at the Alpine Crown, the fraudulent use of my corporate billing accounts, the subsequent eviction by the private security firm, and the massive defamatory smear campaign that Chloe had just launched across multiple social media platforms. Richard listened in complete silence, taking rapid notes. When I finished, he did not offer empty sympathy. He offered swift, devastating legal strategy. He informed me that Chloe's videos met the exact legal definition of defamation per se because they were actively causing quantifiable financial harm to my corporate entity through the fake reviews and boycott campaigns. He advised me to immediately secure all the digital access logs from the smart home system, the security footage from the Apex executive team, and the audio recordings of my phone calls with the catering and housekeeping vendors. We are going to hit them with a massive defamation lawsuit. Richard stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. We will file cease and desist orders before the end of the day. We will subpoena the social media platforms to preserve the videos as evidence of malicious intent. They are actively damaging a multi-million-dollar corporate brand to settle a personal grievance, and we are going to make them pay for every single view those videos generate. I agreed with his strategy completely, but I knew there was a deeper layer to this situation that needed to be addressed. My parents had literally risked their entire lives and destroyed their relationship with me just to impress Preston and his family. They were absolutely obsessed with Preston's supposedly massive generational wealth. They believed that marrying Chloe into the Preston family would elevate their own social standing to an untouchable level. But the way Preston and his parents had behaved during the eviction had struck me as incredibly odd. True old money families rarely acted with such loud, aggressive panic when faced with an unexpected inconvenience. People with real wealth would have simply booked a private jet or called a black car service to take them to another luxury resort. They would not have stood in the snow screaming at my parents like desperate trapped animals. Something about the Preston family narrative felt completely manufactured. I told Richard to hold off on sending the cease and desist orders for exactly 48 hours. I wanted my family to feel confident. I wanted them to think they were winning the public relations war. I needed them to feel secure in their fake victimhood while I gathered the absolute ultimate weapon against them. I hung up with Richard and immediately dialed another number. This one belonged to a high-end private investigator named Martin, whom my firm occasionally used to run deep background checks on shady foreign investors and questionable corporate partners. Martin was a former federal agent who had access to databases and financial records that regular citizens did not even know existed. "Martin," I said when he answered his encrypted line, "I have an urgent, extremely sensitive job for you, and I am willing to pay triple your usual holiday rate for expedited results." I gave him the full legal names of Preston and his parents, along with their supposed residential areas in Boston. I told him to dig into absolutely everything. I wanted their credit histories, their tax records, their active business holdings, and any pending civil or criminal litigation. I wanted to know exactly how much money was sitting in their bank accounts, and exactly who they actually were behind their polished country club facade. I want a complete financial autopsy on the Preston family. I instructed, my voice hard and unyielding. My parents threw away my entire existence because they thought this man was a billionaire. I want to know if they sold their souls for a counterfeit coin. I need the comprehensive dossier on my desk in 48 hours. Martin confirmed the details and ended the call, promising to deliver the intelligence briefing as soon as humanly possible. I set my phone down on the nightstand and walked back over to the windows, looking out over the beautiful snow-covered city. My family was currently reveling in the digital chaos they had created. They were soaking up the internet sympathy, playing the roles of the innocent abused victims. They thought they had successfully destroyed my reputation and brought me to my knees. They had no idea that I was not just ignoring their public attacks. I was actively preparing to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire reality. I spent the rest of my Christmas day focusing on the things that actually mattered. I called the front desk and arranged for a massive holiday dinner to be delivered to Tasha and Zuri's suite. I spent hours reviewing commercial floor plans for a new development project, letting the complex architectural designs soothe my analytical mind. I took another hot bath and read a book, completely ignoring the thousands of angry notifications piling up on my phone. My mother, my father, and my sister had spent my entire life trying to define who I was. They had called me an embarrassment, a failure, and a bitter, lonely woman. They thought they could control my narrative by screaming the loudest and crying the hardest for the cameras. But truth is always a quiet, patient predator. It does not need to scream or cry or perform for an audience. It simply waits in the shadows, gathering strength until the perfect moment to strike. I went to sleep that night feeling an incredible sense of calm anticipation. The smear campaign was raging wildly across the internet, but the digital noise could not penetrate the thick walls of my penthouse suite. My lawyers were sharpening their legal blades, and my investigator was currently ripping the Preston family secrets out of the dark. The war was far from over, but I had already secured the ultimate high ground. I closed my eyes and let the quiet luxury of the hotel lull me into a deep, restful sleep, fully prepared for the absolute carnage that was about to unfold in the days to come. The morning of the 26th of December brought a quiet stillness to the snow-covered city of Denver. My phone was still silently absorbing the massive digital warfare my sister was waging across the internet, but I did not even glance at the screen. I had entirely disconnected my emotional well-being from their chaotic frequency. Instead, I dressed in a sharply tailored cashmere suit and took the elevator down to the hotel dining room to meet Tasha and Zuri for breakfast. When I walked into the private dining area, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking completely transformed. Tasha was wearing a beautiful warm wool sweater we had purchased the day before, and the dark, heavy circles under her eyes had already begun to fade after just 2 nights of proper safe rest. Zuri was happily eating a massive plate of Belgian waffles covered in fresh strawberries, swinging her little legs under the table. The sight of them safe and warm provided a profound contrast to the toxic, bitter family I had left behind in the freezing mountains. I sat down across from Tasha and ordered a simple black coffee. She immediately began thanking me again, her voice thick with heavy emotion and profound gratitude, but I gently raised my hand to stop her. I told her that the hotel room was fully paid for the entire month, but we needed to seriously discuss her long-term stability. I did not want to just give her temporary charity, because charity always runs out and leaves people vulnerable again. I wanted to give her permanent structural empowerment. I asked her about her professional background, and she quietly explained that before she lost her apartment, she had worked for 5 years as a property management assistant, managing tenant ledgers and scheduling maintenance contractors for a large corporate firm. She had lost her job due to a prolonged illness, and the devastating eviction had followed shortly after. It was exactly the kind of practical administrative experience my real estate development firm desperately needed. I looked her directly in the eyes and officially offered her a full-time salaried position as a portfolio administrator at Apex Crown Developments. I outlined the comprehensive benefits package, the full healthcare coverage for her and Zuri, and the starting salary, which was more than double what she had been making at her previous job. Tasha completely broke down, crying into her cloth napkin, unable to comprehend the massive positive shift in her reality. This was what true power actually looked like. It was not about wearing expensive designer clothes to impress racist country club members like my mother constantly did. Real power was the ability to permanently alter the trajectory of a struggling mother's life and pull a vulnerable child out of the freezing cold. I told Tasha to take the rest of the week to rest and recover, and that my human resources director would contact her on Monday to begin the official onboarding process. After ensuring Tasha and Zuri were comfortable, I left the luxury hotel and drove my vehicle to my corporate headquarters, located in the heart of downtown Denver. The massive glass building was technically closed for the holiday week, but Richard and Martin were already waiting for me in the main glass-walled conference room on the top floor. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly heavy and distinctly predatory. We were no longer just passively defending my reputation against a smear campaign. We were actively preparing a legal and financial guillotine to drop on my toxic relatives. I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, placing my leather briefcase on the polished wood. Martin, the former federal agent turned elite private investigator, sat directly across from me, holding a thick red tabbed dossier. He did not offer a friendly smile or engage in any small talk. He simply slid the heavy file across the polished wood surface until it rested directly in front of my hands. "You were absolutely right to trust your initial instincts about that family," Simone Martin said, his voice low and gravelly, echoing slightly in the empty conference room. "The Preston family is nothing but a carefully constructed masterclass in financial smoke and mirrors. They are not old money aristocrats. They are completely out of money and drowning in debt." I slowly opened the heavy folder, and the pacing of the entire morning seemed to grind to an absolute halt as I meticulously reviewed the undeniable financial records Martin had managed to pull from the dark corners of the internet and government databases. The first document was a federal bankruptcy filing from 2014. Preston's father, Arthur, had completely liquidated his legacy inheritance over a decade ago following a series of disastrous commercial real estate investments and reckless spending habits. The massive historic Boston estate they constantly bragged about at family dinners had been quietly sold to a private holding company years ago to avoid a public foreclosure. They were currently just renting a modest townhouse in a lesser neighborhood while desperately pretending they still owned the grand family compound. Their luxury vehicles were all leased under predatory terms, and the lease payments were currently 3 months in arrears, according to the financial audit. My mother had quite literally thrown away her own successful flesh and blood to worship a family that could barely afford to keep their own leased cars from being repossessed by the bank. But the financial autopsy on Preston himself was even more horrifying to witness. Martin pointed to a separate stack of bank statements, court judgments, and digital transaction logs. Preston was not a successful venture capitalist, like he had confidently claimed to my gullible parents over holiday dinners. He was a chronic grifter who was drowning in massive gambling debts and utterly failed cryptocurrency schemes. He had multiple outstanding civil judgments against him for unpaid personal loans and highly fraudulent business practices. His bank accounts showed a continuous vicious cycle of desperate cash advances and predatory high-interest payday loans just to maintain the illusion of a wealthy lifestyle. He had specifically targeted Chloe because my parents loved to project a false image of extreme wealth, and he wrongly assumed he was marrying into a bottomless black checkbook that could solve his financial ruin. He was nothing but a desperate parasite looking for a wealthy host to drain, and my mother had practically gift-wrapped her favorite golden child daughter and handed her directly to him on a silver platter. The sheer absolute stupidity of my parents' social climbing obsession was laid bare in black and white ink right in front of me. They had traded their dignity and their relationship with me for a worthless counterfeit coin. I closed the red folder and looked over at Richard, my lead corporate attorney, who was sitting quietly taking notes. Richard had a massive stack of his own legal documents ready for my review. He had spent the last 48 hours missing his own family holiday to draft a comprehensive defamation lawsuit against Chloe and my parents. "We have the cease and desist orders completely ready to serve," Richard stated calmly, tapping his pen against the legal pad. "We have fully documented the exact financial damages her viral crying videos have caused to your corporate brand, including the direct loss of 2 pending commercial contracts resulting from the fake internet boycott her followers initiated. The monetary damages we are seeking in civil court will completely bankrupt your parents and your sister." I looked at the thick stack of legal documents, feeling a cold, calculating silence settle deeply over my mind. The internet was still raging wildly outside these glass walls, screaming that I was a bitter, jealous monster who ruined her sister's fairy tale wedding. They had absolutely no idea that the fairy tale was actually a horrific financial nightmare designed by a con artist, and I was the only person holding the objective truth in my hands. I felt no guilt about what I was about to do to them. They had built their own trap and confidently walked right into it. Just as we were wrapping up the strategic meeting and finalizing the legal timelines, my phone vibrated sharply on the conference table. It was a text message from an unknown number, but the highly manipulative tone was instantly recognizable. It was my mother using yet another prepaid burner phone to bypass the digital blocks I had placed on her numbers. "Simone," the text message read, "we urgently need to talk right now. The internet situation is getting completely out of hand, and the family is suffering terribly. Your father is having severe chest pains from the stress of sleeping in this awful motel. We are willing to forgive you for the massive misunderstanding at the cabin if you just sit down with us and help fix this public mess. Meet us tomorrow at noon at the Luminary Cafe downtown. We must protect the family image before Preston's parents see these horrible videos and judge us. Please be reasonable for once in your life and do the right thing for your sister." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the unbelievably arrogant words over and over again. They were still actively trying to gaslight me, even from rock bottom. They were completely stranded in a filthy, freezing roadside motel, their social reputation in absolute tatters, yet they still had the unmitigated audacity to act as if they were doing me a massive favor by offering their conditional forgiveness. They actually believed that the intense social media pressure was successfully breaking my spirit, and that I was desperately coming to the table to beg for a truce so the internet hate would stop. They thought the public shaming had worked. They still thought they were dealing with the sad, eager-to-please daughter they had bullied and manipulated for 3 decades. They had no earthly idea that they had just invited a fully armed apex predator to a delicate tea party. I looked up at Richard and Martin, tapping my manicured fingernail against the heavy red dossier containing the absolute destruction of their fake aristocratic reality. I typed a very brief, simple response to the burner number offering no emotion and no leverage. "I will be there at noon," I wrote. I sent the message and immediately tossed the phone back onto the large mahogany table. I instructed Richard to have his process servers standing by out of sight outside the cafe tomorrow afternoon, waiting for my specific signal to move in. I gathered the thick files of financial ruin and legal devastation, placing them carefully into my structured leather briefcase. My parents and my golden child sister wanted a reconciliation meeting to save their precious, fabricated social image. They wanted me to bow down and accept their toxic terms to keep the peace. They were about to walk completely blindly into a financial and psychological slaughterhouse, and I was going to thoroughly enjoy serving them every single undeniable fact of their own catastrophic stupidity while watching their fake perfect world burn to the ground. The Luminary Cafe was a sleek, minimalist establishment located in the wealthiest district of downtown Denver. It was the kind of place that served $20 pour-over coffee and played soft ambient music to a crowd of venture capitalists and tech executives. I arrived exactly 15 minutes early, securing a large private booth in the back corner of the restaurant that offered a clear, unobstructed view of the front entrance. I was dressed in a pristine, tailored white wool suit with a silk emerald blouse underneath, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable power. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, sleek bun, and my posture was perfectly rigid. The heavy red tabbed dossier containing the Preston family financial autopsy rested quietly inside my structured leather briefcase, sitting on the plush velvet seat right next to me. I ordered a black coffee and watched the snow falling gently outside the large glass windows, feeling a strange sense of absolute tranquility washing over my mind. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and the anticipation was like a slow-burning fire in my chest. At precisely 5 minutes past noon, the front doors of the cafe pushed open and my family walked inside. I watched them navigate through the crowded restaurant, and it took every ounce of my professional self-control not to burst into genuine laughter. They were trying desperately to project an image of unbothered high society elegance, but they looked absolutely ridiculous. They had clearly slept in their damp, wrinkled clothes from the night before, because they had no access to dry cleaning at their cheap roadside motel. My mother's expensive cashmere sweater was stained and rumpled, and her hair looked completely deflated without her usual arsenal of heated styling tools. My father looked exhausted with deep dark circles under his eyes and a nervous twitch in his jaw. Chloe looked the worst of all. Her face was puffy and swollen from crying all night, and she was wearing oversized dark sunglasses indoors in a pathetic attempt to hide her red-rimmed eyes. Despite their highly disheveled physical appearance, their body language was incredibly hostile and dripping with unearned arrogance. They walked toward my booth with their chins tilted upward, scanning the room with forced superiority, as if they owned the entire building. They genuinely believed they held the ultimate upper hand today. They actually thought that the massive wave of social media hatred they had manufactured had successfully broken my spirit and forced me to the negotiation table. They reached my booth and slid into the velvet seats across from me without offering a single word of polite greeting. My mother immediately crossed her arms over her chest, staring at me with a cold, triumphant glare. My father placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward in a highly aggressive posturing stance designed to intimidate me. Chloe refused to take off her dark sunglasses, simply crossing her legs and looking away toward the window, playing the role of the tragically abused victim to absolute perfection. The silence stretched between us for a long, tense moment while a waiter approached to take their orders. They ordered expensive lattes and pastries, trying to act casually entitled, while I just sat there watching them with a perfectly blank expression. When the waiter finally walked away, my father cleared his throat and delivered the opening strike. "We are glad you finally decided to act like an adult and come to your senses, Simone," my father said, his voice low and dripping with condescending authority. "The stunt you pulled on Christmas Eve was unforgivable, but we are willing to move past it for the sake of the family image. The internet situation has gotten completely out of control, and it is reflecting poorly on all of us. We need to shut this down today before Preston's family sees the extent of this embarrassing drama and decides to permanently end the engagement." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, keeping my eyes locked onto his face. I did not say a single word. I let the silence hang in the air, forcing them to fill the uncomfortable void with their own desperate demands. My mother jumped in immediately, her tone shifting into that familiar toxic mix of victimhood and aggression. "You have caused an unbelievable amount of damage, Simone," she hissed, leaning across the table. "You completely humiliated us in front of important white people. Preston was absolutely disgusted by your ghetto behavior. He packed his bags and left with his parents because he could not believe he was marrying into a family with such an unstable, vindictive sister. Chloe has been crying nonstop for 2 days straight. Her entire future is hanging by a thread, and it is entirely your fault for being so incredibly selfish and jealous of her happiness. We had to sleep in a filthy, disgusting motel room because of your little power trip. You owe us a massive apology, and you owe us significant compensation for the extreme emotional distress you have purposely inflicted upon this family." Chloe finally turned her head to look at me, sliding her dark sunglasses down the bridge of her nose so I could see her glaring, tear-filled eyes. "You ruined my life," she whispered, her voice shaking with manufactured dramatic rage. "Preston is ignoring all my calls. His mother texted me this morning saying they need time to evaluate if our family values align with theirs. You did this because you want me to be as lonely and miserable as you are. You could not stand seeing me marry into a prestigious old money family while you just work all day on dirty construction sites." I continued to stare at them, my face an impenetrable mask of absolute calm. The sheer audacity of their delusion was a fascinating psychological study. They had illegally broken into my multi-million-dollar commercial property. They had attempted to steal my corporate funds to pay for their private chef. They had launched a vicious viral smear campaign to destroy my professional reputation, and yet they were sitting here demanding that I apologize to them. They were demanding that I fix the consequences of their own catastrophic stupidity. "So what exactly is your proposed solution to this problem?" I asked, my voice smooth and dangerously quiet. What exactly do you want me to do to fix this situation? My father straightened his posture clearly, mistaking my calm demeanor for submission. He pulled a piece of folded paper from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. We have discussed this extensively, and we have put together a list of reasonable conditions for our forgiveness, he stated, adjusting his posture to look more commanding. First, you are going to record a public video apology to Chloe and post it on all your social media channels. You will explain that you suffered a severe mental health breakdown from work stress and that you overreacted out of pure jealousy. You will completely clear Chloe's name and take full public responsibility for the eviction. Second, you are going to immediately reimburse us for the motel stay and the ruined holiday catering, which totals roughly $5,000. He paused, letting the demands settle before delivering the final ultimate piece of unhinged extortion. Third, and most importantly, you are going to sign over the deed to one of your luxury downtown condominiums to Chloe. She needs a premium piece of real estate in her own name to present to Preston's parents as an early wedding gift. It is the only way she can prove to them that our family has legitimate wealth and assets. It is the only way to save her marriage and repair the massive social damage you have caused. If you agree to these terms, we will take the viral videos down, and we will allow you back into the family. If you refuse, we will immediately file a massive civil lawsuit against you for intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. And we will take our story to the local news stations to ensure your real estate firm goes completely bankrupt from the bad publicity. The sheer absolute insanity of their demands hung heavily in the air of the quiet cafe. They were actively trying to blackmail me into giving them a luxury property worth over $1 million just to save face with a racist white family who had already abandoned them in the snow. They wanted me to publicly destroy my own mental health and professional credibility just to feed my sister's insatiable ego. They thought they had successfully trapped me in a corner, using the threat of cancel culture and internet outrage as their primary weapon. They truly believed that my silence over the past 48 hours was a sign of paralyzing fear and submission. I looked at my mother, who was nodding along with my father's demands, wearing a smug, triumphant smirk on her tired face. I looked at Chloe, who was sitting up straighter now, a glimmer of greedy hope shining in her red eyes at the prospect of securing a free luxury condominium. I looked at my father, who was tapping his finger impatiently against the table, waiting for me to bow my head and surrender my assets to him. They had spent my entire life breaking me down, forcing me to carry the weight of their insecurities and expecting me to constantly sacrifice my own happiness to maintain their fraudulent social image. They had bullied me, manipulated me, and erased me whenever it suited their narrative. But that dynamic was officially dead and buried. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not cry or try to defend myself against their absurd accusations. Instead, I simply smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a slow, calculating, predatory smile that caused the smug, arrogant expressions on their faces to falter instantly. The sudden shift in my demeanor completely disrupted their expected script. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her velvet seat, exchanging a quick, nervous glance with my father. "You find this amusing, Simone?" My father demanded, his authoritative tone wavering slightly as uncertainty began to creep into his voice. "We are threatening you with a massive public lawsuit and the complete destruction of your business. This is not a joke." I reached down into the plush velvet seat beside me and picked up my structured leather briefcase. I placed it squarely on the cafe table, pushing their expensive coffee cups out of the way. The heavy metallic click of the briefcase latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the quiet, tense atmosphere of the booth. "I actually find this incredibly amusing, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "Because you have absolutely no idea who you are actually dealing with or what kind of war you just blindly walked into. You think you have leverage because a bunch of strangers on the internet are currently leaving angry comments on a fake viral video. You think I am afraid of a civil lawsuit for emotional distress when you are the ones who committed felony breaking and entering, wire fraud, and criminal trespass on my commercial property." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the thick, heavy dossier that my private investigator, Martin, had delivered to me. The bright red tabs sticking out from the sides of the folder looked like fresh blood against the crisp white cafe table. I did not hand the folder to them. I simply held it in my hands, letting the weight of the physical documents command the entire space. You are sitting here demanding that I hand over $1 million luxury condominium to save Chloe's marriage to a wealthy old money aristocrat. I continued, my gaze locking onto Chloe's increasingly pale face. You are willing to completely destroy your own flesh and blood just to secure a proximity to Preston's generational wealth. You think his racist parents abandoned you in the snow because they were disgusted by my behavior? You think they left because they were offended by the eviction? My mother swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly where they rested on the table. What are you talking about, Simone? She whispered, the false bravado completely draining from her voice. I am talking about the truth, Mother, I said, maintaining direct, intense eye contact with her. The truth that you were too blinded by your own pathetic social climbing desperation to actually see. The truth that is going to completely incinerate this fake reality you have built. I raised the thick red tabbed dossier and dropped it forcefully onto the center of the table. The heavy slap of the papers hitting the wood made Chloe visibly flinch in her seat. The smug arrogance that had defined their entire existence was entirely gone, replaced by a creeping, suffocating sense of impending doom. They stared at the closed folder as if it were a live explosive device waiting to detonate right in their faces. They had come to this cafe to demand an apology and extract a luxury property from the daughter they despised. They thought they were the predators backing a wounded animal into a corner. They were completely oblivious to the fact that the cage doors had just securely locked behind them, and the real slaughter was only just beginning to unfold. The sharp metallic click of the briefcase opening sounded like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence of the cafe booth. I slowly pulled out the heavy red tabbed dossier, feeling the immense weight of the devastating truth in my hands. My father leaned back slightly, crossing his arms in a defensive posture, while my mother watched me with narrowed, suspicious eyes. Chloe was still hiding behind her dark sunglasses, but I could see the rigid tension in her jaw. They were all waiting for me to pull out a checkbook or a pen to sign over my property. Instead, I placed the thick stack of financial documents squarely in the center of the table, right on top of their ridiculous list of demands. You want a luxury condominium to impress Preston's old money family? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an incredibly dangerous edge. You want to save face with the aristocrats who abandoned you in the snow. I reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of the dossier, exposing the first set of undeniable government records. The stark black and white print of the federal bankruptcy filings stared back at them. My parents leaned forward instinctively, their eyes scanning the complex legal jargon at the top of the page. There is no old money, Mother, I stated coldly, watching the realization slowly begin to register on her face. Arthur and Victoria have been completely bankrupt for over 10 years. They lost the historic family estate in Boston to a private holding company to avoid public foreclosure. The luxury vehicles they drive are heavily leased under predatory subprime terms, and they are currently 3 months behind on the payments. They do not own anything. They are renting a modest townhouse while pretending they still rule the world. They left you standing in the snow at Aspen because they quite literally could not afford to book another hotel room. My father's face went completely pale. The arrogant mask he had worn for decades began to crack instantly. That is impossible, he stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous authority. Preston is a successful venture capitalist. He showed us the portfolio projections. He took Chloe to elite country clubs. I flipped to the next section of the dossier. The red tabs separating the financial ruin into neat categorical sections. Preston is not a venture capitalist, Dad. Preston is a chronic, desperate grifter. I pushed the stack of heavily redacted bank statements and court judgments toward Chloe, knowing she was reading every single word through her dark lenses. Preston is currently drowning in over $600,000 of unsecured gambling debt and failed cryptocurrency schemes. He has multiple active civil judgments against him for unpaid personal loans and highly fraudulent business practices. His bank accounts are a relentless cycle of desperate cash advances and predatory high-interest payday loans. He does not have a portfolio. He has a severe gambling addiction and a mountain of legal trouble. Chloe's hands began to tremble violently. She slowly reached up and pulled her dark sunglasses down, revealing wide, terrified eyes. "You are lying," she whispered, her voice cracking under the immense weight of the evidence sitting right in front of her. "Preston bought me a custom diamond engagement ring. He promised we were buying a brownstone in Manhattan next year. The ring is cubic zirconia set in plated silver," I replied mercilessly, not breaking eye contact with her. "The receipt from the cheap online retailer is on page 4 of that section. Preston targeted you, Chloe, because Mom and Dad constantly brag about their massive fake wealth. He thought he was marrying into a bottomless black checkbook that could instantly solve his catastrophic financial ruin. He is a desperate parasite looking for a wealthy host to drain, and Mom practically gift-wrapped you and handed you to him on a silver platter." The absolute silence that descended upon our booth was suffocating. The ambient music of the cafe seemed to fade away completely, leaving only the sound of my mother's sharp, frantic breathing. The delusion she had built her entire identity around was currently disintegrating into a pile of worthless ashes. She had spent my entire life telling me I was an embarrassment because I built my own wealth from the ground up, while she worshipped a family of literal con artists, simply because they were white and claimed to have historical status. But I was not finished. The ultimate slaughter had not even occurred yet. I looked directly at my father, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. He was staring at the bankruptcy documents, as if they were written in a foreign language, desperately trying to find a loophole in the undeniable reality. I reached into the very back of the dossier and pulled out the final document. It was a highly confidential banking record that Martin had managed to extract from a heavily secured database. I slid the single piece of paper slowly across the table until it rested directly in front of my parents. "The real tragedy here is not that Chloe is marrying a broke con artist," I said, my voice dropping an octave, the sheer coldness of my tone freezing the air between us. "The real tragedy is the absolute staggering stupidity you two displayed trying to buy her way into that fake family." My mother looked down at the paper, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. A sharp, strangled gasp escaped her throat, and she brought both hands up to cover her mouth. "You thought Preston was just going through a temporary liquidity issue?" I continued, analyzing every single micro-expression of panic washing over their faces. "You thought that if you just helped him clear his initial debts, he would secure his trust fund and elevate you both into high society. So you did the most remarkably idiotic thing possible. To fund Chloe's lavish lifestyle and to pay off Preston's hidden gambling debts, you secretly took out a massive high-interest second mortgage on your own home." My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide and wild with genuine terror. "How did you get this?" he demanded, his voice trembling violently. "You literally signed away the roof over your own heads to impress a family of broke, racist grifters," I said, leaning forward, my presence commanding the entire space. "You mortgaged your entire future to fund the illusion of Chloe's perfect aristocratic life. You gave Preston over $200,000 of cash you pulled from the equity of your home, and he immediately blew it all on offshore sports betting and fake cryptocurrency startups." Chloe turned to my parents, her face twisted in absolute shock and horror. "You took out a second mortgage," she cried, her voice rising hysterically. "You told me the money for the wedding deposits came from your investment returns. You told Preston we had liquid assets. We were doing it for you, Chloe." My mother sobbed openly, weeping now in the middle of the crowded cafe. "We were just trying to secure your future. We thought Preston was going to pay us back as soon as they got married and his trust fund unlocked." "There is no trust fund, Mother," I stated forcefully, cutting through her pathetic tears. "There is no money. There never was any money. And now, because you have missed the last 4 payments on that predatory second loan, the bank is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on your home in less than 30 days. The realization finally set in completely, and the psychological collapse was absolute. The arrogant, untouchable facade they had worn for decades shattered into a million jagged, irreparable pieces. My mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, her tears ruining her expensive makeup and staining her cashmere sweater. My father sat completely frozen, staring blankly at the foreclosure notice, his chest heaving with silent, panicked breaths. He had spent his entire life judging my career as unstable, and now he was less than a month away from losing his own home to the bank. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically sick. The golden child who had spent her entire existence looking down on me was currently processing the horrifying reality that she was engaged to a bankrupt gambling addict and her parents were about to be homeless because they tried to buy her a fake fairy tale. She grabbed a napkin and pressed it against her mouth, her chest heaving as the panic attack fully set in. "You demanded that I give you $1 million luxury condominium to save your reputation," I said, looking at the pathetic broken family sitting across from me. "You threatened to sue me for emotional distress and destroy my business. You thought you could still bully me into submission because you were so desperate to hide your own catastrophic failure." My father finally looked up, his eyes red and pleading. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by pure, desperate terror. "Simone, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything. You have so much money now. You are so successful. Please, you have to help us pay off the bank. We are your parents." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, no residual desire to seek his approval. The little girl who used to cry over his rejection was completely gone, and the woman sitting across from him was entirely untouchable. I slowly reached out and pulled the heavy red dossier back toward my side of the table, closing it with a sharp, definitive snap. I picked up my structured leather briefcase and stood up, smoothing the front of my pristine white wool suit. I had only taken a single step toward the exit when the desperate sound of a chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor echoed behind me. "Simone, please wait!" My mother shrieked, her voice completely stripped of its usual haughty refinement. I stopped and turned around slowly, watching her stumble out of the velvet booth. She practically lunged across the distance separating us, grabbing onto the sleeve of my pristine white wool suit with trembling, panicked fingers. "You cannot just walk away and leave us like this," she sobbed, openly begging in front of the entire cafe of wealthy patrons who were now openly staring at her public meltdown. "We will lose the house, Simone. We will lose everything we have spent our entire lives building. Preston took all our equity, and the bank is going to throw us out on the street. You are my daughter. You are flesh and blood. You have to help us. You have millions of dollars sitting in your accounts. Paying off our second mortgage would be nothing to you. It would just be a drop in the bucket. Please, I am begging you now. Save your family from total, absolute ruin and destruction." My father had also scrambled out of the booth, walking toward me with his head bowed, his hands shaking visibly at his sides. He looked utterly defeated, entirely stripped of the patriarchal arrogance that had defined my entire childhood. "Simone," he stammered, his eyes filled with genuine terror. "We were foolish. We made a terrible, catastrophic mistake trying to secure Chloe's future. But you cannot let your own parents become homeless. We will do whatever you want. We will publicly apologize. We will take back everything we said. Just please write the check to the bank. We are begging you." I looked down at my mother's desperate, gripping hands and then slowly pulled my arm out of her grasp, smoothing out the wrinkled fabric of my sleeve. I felt absolutely no empathy for the pathetic, weeping strangers standing in front of me. They were only sorry that their scam had failed. They were only begging because they had run out of victims to drain. I looked my father directly in his pleading eyes and delivered the final lethal blow. "I am afraid my real estate job is just too unstable to help you, Dad," I said, quoting his exact cruel words back to him with chilling precision. "I really do not have any money to throw away on people who actively try to erase me from the family. I guess you will just have to figure out how to maintain your high society image from a cheap apartment." My mother let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail, collapsing back against the cafe table as the absolute finality of my words crushed her entirely. Chloe was still sitting in the booth, her face buried in her hands, crying hysterically over her ruined fake marriage and her impending tragic financial ruin and collapse. Their despair was absolute, but my business with them was not quite finished yet. I raised my right hand and gave a subtle signal toward the back corner of the restaurant. The heavy wooden doors of the private dining room swung open, and my lead corporate attorney Richard stepped out into the main dining area, accompanied by two very large, intimidating process servers wearing dark suits. They walked purposefully across the cafe floor, their heavy footsteps cutting through the sound of my mother's pathetic sobbing. My parents looked up in fresh confusion and rising terror as the three men approached. They surrounded our table, blocking any possible escape route. "You thought our meeting today was just about you demanding a luxury condominium and a fake apology," I said, my voice echoing with pure corporate authority. "You thought you could launch a massive viral smear campaign against my professional business and just walk away without any consequences. You were entirely wrong." Richard nodded to the process servers, who immediately stepped forward and dropped thick, heavy stacks of legal documents directly onto the table, right in front of my father, my mother, and my golden child sister. "You are being officially served," Richard stated, his voice booming with icy legal precision. "These are formal cease and desist orders preventing you from speaking Simone's name or mentioning her corporate entities in any public forum. Furthermore, you are being served with immediate restraining orders. You are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Simone, her residence, or any of her commercial properties, including the Alpine Crown." My father stared blindly at the massive stack of legal papers, his mouth hanging open in shock. "But the final blow is for you, Chloe," I added, looking down at my sobbing, treacherous younger sister now. "Those documents also contain a massive multi-million-dollar civil defamation lawsuit. We have subpoenaed the social media platforms and secured all the digital evidence of your fake crying videos. We have fully documented the exact financial damages your vicious lies caused my corporate brand. We are suing you for every single penny you will ever earn for the rest of your miserable life. If you ever try to drag my name through the mud again, I will personally ensure that your wages are garnished until the day you die." Chloe let out a high-pitched scream of pure terror, pulling her knees up to her chest and rocking back and forth in the velvet booth. My mother was gasping for air, hyperventilating as the complete magnitude of their legal and financial destruction finally locked them in a permanent, inescapable cage. They were broke, they were about to be homeless, and they were now facing a massive corporate lawsuit they could never possibly afford to fight. I did not wait to watch them open the envelopes. I simply turned on my heels and walked smoothly out of the cafe, the crisp, clean winter air hitting my face, completely outside now. I climbed into the back of my waiting town car, leaving the smoking wreckage of my toxic family entirely behind me. 1 entire year passed since that fateful morning in the Denver cafe. The earth continued to spin, the seasons changed, and the massive heavy weight of generational trauma was permanently lifted from my shoulders. The legal battles were swift and completely devastating for my family. They lost their home to the bank foreclosure within 30 days. Chloe's marriage to Preston dissolved into a bitter, chaotic mess of bankruptcy filings and mutual hatred, leaving her completely and utterly destroyed alone. My parents were forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment in a rundown neighborhood, their precious social standing utterly annihilated by their own greedy foolishness. The defamation lawsuit legally gagged them, ensuring they could never speak my name or attempt to profit off my existence ever again. They were effectively erased from my reality. It was Christmas Eve once again, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. I was standing in the grand, magnificent living room of the Alpine Crown, watching the heavy snow fall peacefully over the majestic Aspen Mountains, right outside my huge glass windows everywhere. The massive 2-story stone fireplace was roaring with a beautiful warm fire, casting a soft golden glow across the room. Soft holiday jazz drifted through the invisible ceiling speakers, setting a joyful, elegant mood. But the most beautiful part of the evening was not the luxury of the $4 million estate. It was the people filling the rooms with genuine laughter and authentic love. Tasha was sitting on the plush leather sofa, wearing a stunning tailored dress, holding a glass of expensive champagne. She had thrived in her role as my portfolio administrator, completely transforming her current life, becoming one of my most trusted corporate directors. Zuri was 9 years old now, running happily around the living room in a velvet holiday dress, carrying a massive pile of beautifully wrapped gifts. My lead attorney Richard was there with his husband, sharing stories and laughing loudly. My entire executive team, My loyal friends and the people who actually loved me unconditionally filled the estate with a profound, undeniable warmth. There was no tension. There was no anxiety about saying the wrong thing or wearing the wrong clothes. There was no desperate need to perform for racist, aristocratic, wealthy strangers. I had spent my youth trying to buy a seat at a toxic table begging for scraps of affection. But tonight, I realized the most powerful truth of my existence. Sometimes the greatest holiday gift is not the acceptance of your biological family. It is realizing you are strong enough to walk away from their poison and build a beautiful table of your own. I raised my crystal glass sipping champagne as I watched Zuri smile. Breaking generational curses is hard work, but the absolute best revenge is not revenge at all. It is simply unbothered, massive, magnificent success entirely. The story of Simone teaches us profound lessons about breaking free from toxic family dynamics and recognizing our true worth. Society often conditions us to believe that blood relations demand our unconditional loyalty and endless sacrifice. However, Simone shows us that when family members choose to view you as a burden or an embarrassment, you are under no obligation to continuously seek their approval. You cannot heal in the same environment that actively tries to destroy you. One of the most powerful takeaways from this narrative is the importance of setting absolute boundaries. When faced with ultimate betrayal, Simone did not waste her energy arguing or screaming. She recognized that toxic people feed on emotional reactions. Instead, she responded with cold, calculated action. She legally and financially removed her toxic family from her life, allowing their own arrogant choices to orchestrate their downfall. True power lies in silence and execution, not in loud arguments. Furthermore, this story highlights the beautiful reality of chosen families. We cannot control the family we are born into, but we possess the absolute power to choose who we allow to sit at our dinner table. By redirecting her resources to help Tasha and Zuri, Simone proved that true wealth is found in uplifting those who genuinely appreciate you. She broke the cycle of generational trauma by refusing to pass down the cruelty she experienced. Finally, we must always remember that authentic success is the ultimate silencer. You do not need to prove your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You must keep building your empire, stay true to your values, and let your massive, unbothered success speak for itself. Please share your own experiences with setting family boundaries in the comments below so we can support each other through this healing journey.